the addictive nature that we have is the whole reason that we're actually good at other things.
Welcome to Ultrahabits. Here, we go under the hood with our guests to unpack the minutiae and to understand what processes and systems they engage or research that result in ultra-enhanced living.
I want to do every single day. So when I run, it's a thing that I check off my to-do list. But my to-do list will have anything from 5 to 25 things on it, and I think we all kind of do some version of this. There's the easy things. Like I like to put things on there that I can check mark or I can mark them through. Go to the post office. Pick up the prescriptions at CVS, because like those feel good because when they're done, and they don't take very long, and like it's okay, I got that done. But meanwhile, lurking on that list are like like I need to get with my accountant to do taxes, I need to do this, and like those are not fun things. I don't want to do them. Therefore, every day it just kind of continues to slide its way down the list, and people think that I'm a forever continuously motivated person. Not true.
Let me ask you a question, Charlie. As a person that is got high energy and obviously in recovery, and a person that likes to move, how do you ensure that you're not just addicted to movement? And you're actually focusing on the essentials and the priorities, because before we started recording, you were effectively saying that movement and what can be perceived as valuable movement is sometimes it's just useless, right? Like it's just more stuff. Like, how do you make sure that you're actually moving towards what's important?
Well, I mean, dude, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't assure that, and I screw it up regularly, and I mean, I'll actually give it to you in an example of actual movement, because I've got a knee problem right now. I've had it for a couple of years. I've got there's a lot of wear and tear. There's a lot of miles on this body. And I know intellectually that what I need to do is to take some time off and to focus my energy on healing practices for a while. And that means like going to the gym and doing the 30-minute routine that my movement specialist has given me to do. And like, I know that that's how I'm going to strengthen my quads and my glutes and the area. These are things that I know are problems that are preventing me from being a better, healthier runner. Yet it's still hard as shit to do it, because what I want to do when I get a little stressed or like I've just been busy all day, all I want to do is put on my shoes and run out the door. Like that's what I want to do. That's the
Charlie, what's it like getting older and accumulating physical issues when you have the mindset and the habituation of a runner? Like, has that been an adjustment?
It sucks sometimes. I mean, I'm totally transparent about it, and you would have no reason to know this, but I will be 60 next month, and and so it's funny how I mean, 59 and 60, it's just 1 year apart, but it feels more monumental, of course, getting into a new the previous decades have all seemed like, oh great, I'm in a new age category. Maybe I'll win the local 5K, right? And now it's like,
you're now a master. Like, what category are you in the ultras now? Like beyond
I've been a master for 20 damn years now, so I can't win shit in that category because all the 40-year-olds are kicking my ass. So I mean, I've got some interesting choices in front of me in this next period, and I was just speaking to my wife about, because she's been going through some, I think some significant health challenges the last few years, and so her health is kind of always a topic in our house, and as it should be, and hers is life and death. So the things that we're working on are very serious. With me, they're my version of life and death, because to me, not being able to exercise or move my body the way I want to is frustrating. It's painful. It makes me feel a little hopeless some days. And so, but I have an opportunity. We'll talk about this again in the future, but I have a chance to go. I'll just say in general what it is. I have a chance to go to a program for a few months that is related to like hyperbaric chamber and tons of testing, and it's a lot of mental health work. Because I mean, going way back to my teens, I had a couple of really serious concussions playing football, and then mountain bike accidents later, and I hit my head more than a few times. And I feel like those, I don't know. To say I feel like they affect me, I don't know. The older I get, when I wake up feeling a little foggy in the morning and lacking, the energy that I've had in the past, like part of me is like going, okay, can I do something about this? Like, is there a fix that I can do that's just a psychological thing? Or is there maybe, like, I've never had a brain scan. So to go to a place where that's the starting point, brain scans, overall analysis of general health and well-being, and then digging in specifically on the issues and the problems, and then having a 3-month long program where I am working on those things. Like, who gets to do that? I mean, no, almost none of us in our lives gets to like take the time to go do something where we are specifically just like, we start programs, whether it's nutrition or exercise or breath work or doing some, doing a Deepak Chopra meditation program or whatever it might be. Those are all wonderful, right? Those are all wonderful things to do, and they're amazing, but like, they're rarely focused and concentrated over a period of time. And I ask myself, what is more important? What could be more important than actually taking the time as I turn 60 years old to not only evaluate, where am I really right now? What condition are my joints in? How is my brain? Like, all of these things. And then saying, okay, I'm going to focus on trying to fix these things or improve them over a period of time. And let's see how that serves me down the road. Yet I'm still the same guy. I'm still built the same way. I want to just put on my shoes and go run right now because it makes me feel good today. So I feel crazy by not doing that.
It's interesting as well, like being known as the running man, right? Like in such a entrenched identity piece, and then kind of having to shift and understand there might be there's finite elements there, right? I mean, of
Yeah.
course, people are running. I mean, someone just ran Badwater. I think the dude was like 79 years old, right? Like, I mean,
Oh yeah,
it's done.
Bob
You,
Becker. Yeah.
I'm sure it's one of your friends. So,
It is.
well, let's pull
Well,
this
I need to
back.
wait before you move on. So
Yeah.
yeah, I need to like Google real quick and check, like, is there the cycling man? Has somebody done that already? Because
You'll find something, dude.
exactly. I mean, if I have
That's
to be
Charlie Engle.
if I've got to be the kayaking man or the the wheelchair man, like I'm gonna find a way. And I think most of your listeners probably feel the same way. Like, as long as your attitude is, there may come a day, and I get asked all the time, what happens if you can't run? I'm like, I don't know, but I'm 100% certain that I'll find something else to do.
It's always interesting when you talk to cyclists that were runners, and when they can't run because their knees or whatever, when you bring up running, like there's this like, oh, I miss it.
Yeah.
Like it's just
Yeah.
like they're on the bike, but it's like, you don't. I mean, I've never been a cyclist, but I've always looked at them like with my nose up on the trails because I'm like, yeah, on a bike, right? Like, come on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I assume it's hard, but I don't know if you'd get the same kind of hit like you and I need, right?
Yeah. I can't get myself on a bike, and I am a pretty good cyclist, but I can't quite get myself to that same
Yeah.
place of discomfort on a bike that I can while running. And that's the one thing that I would miss if I couldn't run. My hope is that if I can't run, if the day comes I can't run like competitively, whatever
Mhm.
that means, or even as far as I want to go, that I'll find a way to continue to use running, and walking. I mean, honestly, it's about being outside and being on my feet, and like you know what I'm talking about, and most of your listeners do too. It's just that connection you have to the earth that you can't actually get in really any other way.
Yeah, to talk about it in, the circles that we move in that kind of philosophy, like, you may it may actually give you an opportunity to evolve
Hmm.
as well. Like, who knows what Charlie beyond the running, and you'll always be involved with running, and that will always be a key part of your message. But you will evolve because that's how you are, right? And that's the way you live your life. And you and I may not have a view on what that looks like today,
Yeah.
right? It's kind of just understanding that, there's an evolutionary process there. So I want to talk about the fact that you're 30 years sober. Like, for a lot of people, that's like mind blowing, right? Like, I was talking to a young guy who, is in some of the circles I'm in, and he's just newly sober. And like, for him, a week or 2 weeks or a month is like mind blowing in itself. Like 30 years of continuous sobriety. I want to talk about the elements of how you have been able to do that when you reflect on that. So, for those that don't know, can you explain to the listeners what your relationship to alcohol and drugs were?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, it was it was the only important relationship in my life. For a long time, it was everything else that I did, even the successful, positive things, were in service of my desire and need to manipulate, acquire, and set the stage for the next binge or the next drunk or whatever it was. And I mean, it's a weird thing to say, but and it's taken a long time. I've understood this for quite a while, but even I was a binger, a really, really heavy duty binger for, about 12 years. And so there were periods of time during those 12 years where I cleaned up, whether that was for a week or a month, or even I had 6 months one time of sobriety during that decade or so. And yet I knew
Mm,
deep in the core of my brain, I always knew I was going to use or drink again. So in a weird way, every act, and I don't care if it was going to the soup kitchen on Thanksgiving Day to serve the
mm,
homeless, or if it was,
mm,
showing up for a family member's, wedding or funeral, like all those things, I looked at them as, brownie point check marks in the good Charlie box, because I
mm,
knew that the bad thing was coming whenever it was going to come, and that I would need all those
mm,
check marks on the good side to remind me and those around me that wasn't all of me, the bad part. But it's devious and it's difficult,
mm,
and I appreciate you mentioning the 30 years. It's as you know, it just happened last weekend, and my way of celebrating, of course, is different than most people's. I run for the same number of hours, to equal my years sober. So I ran for 30 hours, on a 2 mile loop, but it was around an addiction treatment center in Maryland, an amazing place that I work with regularly, a nonprofit, and they're phenomenal. And like,
mm,
to there's truly nothing better than to have a bunch of patients who are in
mm,
rehab. I mean, so we're talking about people who
mm,
days before or weeks before, had a needle in their arm or a pipe in their mouth or
mm,
whatever it was, and they were in hell. I mean, absolute
mm,
hell. And for them to maybe pull some inspiration or just hope by being able to participate in something like this. So many of them came out, they weren't required, but many of them were given the opportunity to come out and walk or run a couple of loops and spend time. There were several hundred people on the campus of Ashley Addiction Treatment Center in Maryland. And for them to have that interaction kind of with regular people, although a lot of them were sober, it was important. And I think it's that kind of thing that I still very much I live for, and I want, I don't believe it's attraction rather than promotion is the old saying that most of us in recovery know. And it's this idea that if you're ever sitting on the sofa telling your kids to go outside and play, you're missing the point. It's about, if you want your kids to go outside and play, go outside and play with them. And I know it can't happen all the time, but if you're not showing other people how to do a thing rather than telling them how to do it, then I think you're going to miss the mark. And so this event allowed me to do something, invite other people to do it with me, and just step back and watch the magic happen.
One observation from your story is that, and you mentioned it earlier, like how even when you went to the soup kitchen, it was to get this kind of internal credit. So you knew when you wrote yourself off, throughout your story, there's this thread of like cognitive dissonance. Like you were always in this inner struggle of balance, and you would almost run to purge. It was almost like you beat yourself up through running. And then you get sober. How did running change for you in the way that you viewed running when you initially got sober? And then how did running support you in early recovery?
Yeah, it's a great question because I did. You nailed it. I mean, I used running as a form of punishment because it's reliable suffering. I knew how to make myself hurt, like literally physically hurt through running. But I knew how to, like, I guess in a weird way, not to make a too indelicate a comparison, it's a little bit like knowing just how much to do when you're drinking or drugging. I mean, I went over that line many times, but like you try to stay on that razor's edge of what you're doing. And with running, I knew how to like just get there to that edge and then pull back just enough to be able to stay right there in that painful spot. And what I trusted, even during the years of addiction, was that painful spot would be revealing in some way for me. So there would come a moment during that run where the right thought would pop up, or the right realization, the thing that I needed to be thinking about or focusing on, would come to the top of my mind. And so I kind of learned that only came through, I needed to bring myself to a pain point where I couldn't think about anything else. Like, that's how I looked at it. Like, because we all know as runners, if you're running and you're hyper focused on, I mean, there comes a point where you're no longer thinking about the grocery list or paying your rent or all the other stuff that might run through your mind on a casual run. You're now hyper focused on the pain. And I liked that. And it took me years to figure out how to sort of use that to my advantage and not use it, and I still admit today, there are times when I go out for a run where, for whatever reason, maybe I'm not feeling great about myself at this moment. And I will dive into that pain in a way that is still cleansing for me. And the difference is, I haven't accumulated the same kind of damage in recent years. I'm not out there hurting people. I'm not, if I need to apologize for something, I'm usually pretty quick to do it. I mean, the difference is, back in the day, I accumulated so much shit that I felt like I had to make up for all the time, that running was a way to kind of address that, if that makes sense. Now I'm certainly far from perfect, but in a general world, I'm not hiding from people. I'm not running away from my actions or big mistakes that I've
Mhm.
made. I'm just like living daily life, and running still is the best way for me to connect to my deepest feelings, simply put.
Mm. Eh, In terms of recovery and having the support of a group, do you feel that that helps people stay sober versus doing it alone, and why? Like, what do you think is and rest in the power of the group?
I mean, it's everything, honestly, because I look, man, after 30 years, I can't tell you how many people come up to me and say, I don't want to do AA. AA is not for me, or NA is not for me,
Mm,
or church isn't for me, or
mm,
I'm not a God person, whatever they might say. I mean, literally, I've heard it all, and I've heard it all 100 times. And I don't ever tell a person that they're wrong, because
mm,
that's not my business, and it's not for me to say that they're wrong. I might be thinking they're wrong.
mm,
A lot of times a person, of course, will, they'll go to one AA meeting, they'll hear the word God in the meeting, and all of a sudden it's like, oh man, this
mm,
isn't for me.
mhm,
Sometimes you have to stay around long enough to like get the
mm,
message, and then decide which parts of it you can use. And as my
mm,
first sponsor said way back when, you take what you can use and you leave the rest. So you
mm,
might sit through a whole hour of a meeting,
mm,
but when is this not true? I mean, I don't care if in your business life and you're in other parts of life, you sit through a whole hour of something, there might only be two little nuggets that you take
If
from it.
that if
Right.
that, sometimes, yeah,
Right.
totally, yeah.
And the
Mm,
rest of it's like, I don't have
mm,
room in my brain for all that other nonsense. It's not what I want. But your question about, community and fellowship is what I heard you say,
mm,
and that's the important part. I'm lucky because I don't just rely on one community. I have a recovery community, I have a running community,
mm,
I have I've been vegan for a long time, so kind of a vegan community. And um and there's way more than that. So I make myself available
mm,
and a willing participant in those communities. And like, if I don't show up for a while, somebody's going to text me or call me and say, hey,
mm,
haven't seen you for a bit, what's going on? And like,
mm,
if you're not part of some
mm,
community that someone actually notices if you're
mm,
missing,
mhm,
then
mhm,
you're in my opinion,
mm,
you need to make yourself more available. Like, it's also my way of being of service. I am someone that's very publicly sober. I
mm, mhm,
publicly run, and pretty much
mm,
anybody knows if they have a question about those two things, and there's something that I can share with them, whatever knowledge I have, I'll happily share with them. And by making that available, I think that I am of service
mhm,
to others in that way. And as my first sponsor said all those years ago, to keep it, you have to give it away. Like, whatever your gift is, whatever that thing that you've developed expertise in, if you're not sharing it openly with other people without the expectation of a return,
mhm,
if the
mhm,
only reason you're sharing is because you're going to get something out of it, I don't know. I don't think that's sustainable. I mean, I'm not condemning anybody, but I think, you want to occasionally just be able to like offer something up without
mhm,
expectation
mhm,
of anybody even saying thank you, right? I mean,
mhm.
that's not the way life always works. Sometimes you do stuff and nobody thanks you, but you did it. And so my goal is to find that place inside me where I'm okay with just knowing that I did my best effort to help somebody else. And I think that's what community is all about.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me around, how to shift habits and how to start to orientate themselves in a new direction. And the answer that I give is surrounding yourself in the community of people that are moving in that direction and ahead of you. And I've learned that through 12-step recovery.
Yeah.
The challenge, I think, with people that want to isolate and do their own get sober piece is they're the smartest person in the room, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no illustrative examples. There's no one to sanity check their thinking. There's no one to challenge them. There's no expansion around them. And ultimately, when I see a lot of people come into addiction recovery, 12 steps, and they're like, I got this. I'm going to do it on my own. But I think what's secretly happening unbeknownst to them is their ego is looking to isolate them and ultimately take them out. I think they don't think that, but for me, to try to do it alone as an addict or an alcoholic is nearly impossible. Uh, in that in that vein, in terms of using 12-step recovery, what's your view on the steps as a process? Like, now that you've been in recovery for 30 years, what do you feel about the steps and why they're so transformative?
Yeah, I mean, you said so many important things right there, and um, I can go run 100 miles by myself too,
Mm,
but I don't
mm,
know. I mean, and I've done it a few times, and there is something powerful and transformative. But honestly, the joy of being around other people that have a common goal and having
mm,
shared suffering. You know, the favorite part of what happened last weekend with this 30-hour run, I invited all these people there to be
mm,
there with me and to do this event. And there were hundreds of people, but only about 30 of them did I invite to come be there for all 30 hours, like
mm,
overnight. And,
mhm,
those sort of
mhm,
magical times in the middle of the
mm,
night, 3 o'clock in the morning,
mm,
the people are a little loopy.
mm,
But the absolute favorite thing that happened to me was that
mm,
I would look, it's a 2 mile loop, and I would look across, I could see a
mm,
quarter of a mile across a big field, and I would see two people walking or running together who I knew the day before. They had never met each other before.
mm,
They are laughing, like I can even
mm,
kind of hear them, and I can hear
mm,
their voices. And at the end of this thing, like they're hugging each other and saying, "I love you," and like that power can't happen alone.
mm,
And it's the same with recovery. It's, the struggle and the journey that you have in sharing that with other people, uh, is where those are the parts of the journey that you remember. Nobody ever remembers a marathon like the first 15 miles if they were just easy. You don't even remember anything until things get difficult. And if you're by yourself and they're difficult, you're almost certainly, you have a much higher likelihood of not getting through that sober.
mm, mm,
And B, so what if you do? I mean, we all know that, I mean, drinking wasn't my problem. Everything else was my problem. The drinking was simply the symptom, the manifestation of the hurt and the pain that I had. And I know this is cliche, but we have all known people who have quit on their own, and pretty much to a person that I know who's in that circumstance, they are fairly miserable people to be around. Because I mean, all the things that made them struggle and that, kind of created the person that they drank over,
mhm,
all the other underlying things are still there.
mm,
They're just not drinking. So, I'm sure that's not everybody, and there might be some. I don't know though. I mean, sure, there's people out there that I'm sure have quit on their own, and maybe they're happy and they communicate well and all of that. But the point is doing something in a vacuum where you're not sharing the struggle with other people and allowing them to feed off of your energy, like, because that's the power. If you feel stuck,
mm,
I mean,
mm,
this, we've talked about it before. People ask me all the time, what do I do when I feel stuck in my sobriety? I'm like, that's the easiest question I ever get. When you
mhm,
feel stuck, concentrate your efforts on helping somebody else get unstuck. If you just simply go out and help somebody else, they don't have to be in recovery, but just find somebody else and offer yourself up and your service to them. It's a miracle what happens when you stop focusing so heavily on your own stuff.
Yeah, without the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's effectively no dojo to
Mm-mm.
spar and grow. There's no accountability.
Yeah,
There's no reorientation of values because you don't have to. And that's where I think you're saying, like, when you go at it alone, you're effectively the same person that drank, unless you go down your own
yeah,
personal journey of growth. But then again, you need to find a community. I think that's
yeah,
accountable. And obviously 12-step recovery is the most successful community. And it's always funny to me, people that leave, it's almost they look at me proudly and say, I'm going to do it alone. Like there's this kind of sense of stoicism
yeah,
about it. Like, I've got this. And well, it's like, okay, well, you're missing the point. It's not about going at it alone. It's about evolving as a human.
yeah.
That's the bigger
Well,
picture here.
that's it. And you asked about the 12 steps, and I didn't answer that part of the question. But I mean, I still, you know, I still talk about steps with my sponsor. I still talk about steps with people that I'm sponsoring. But I also, I mean, in full disclosure, I sponsor a lot of people right now who aren't technically like in AA or NA. And I don't, what I don't do, and look, it's not for me to say what anybody should do in sponsorship. So nobody
Mhm.
should take this as I don't ever like to start sentences with the words you should, because that's none of my business, right? But what I would say is, as a sponsor of a lot of people through the years, if someone adamantly comes to me and says, I really would like your help, but I don't want to do AA, or I don't want to do NA, or I don't want to do a 12-step program, I'm like, fine, no problem. Here's what we'll do. Ultimately, I end up doing the same thing. They just don't know it. The difference
Mhm.
is, I will take them through a version of, understanding that they need to admit and take responsibility for
Mhm.
for making the commitment to a different life, and they do admit and recognize that the way they're living life isn't sustainable. So I mean, you can change. I'm a wordsmith. I'll change the language, and you get people to like basically end up doing the 12 steps without having to
Mhm.
like somehow say that they're in AA. And I just don't, there's no doubt that 12-step recovery has helped more people than any other single thing. But I also freely say it's
Mhm.
not for me to say that there's not other ways to get sober. And for me, running was an equal part for me. Like I don't think I would have survived
Mhm.
12-step recovery
Mhm.
alone.
Mhm.
If that was the only thing I was
Mhm.
allowed to do and I didn't have the physical outlet of running, maybe I would have gotten, maybe I still would have gotten some traction, but I needed the physical release.
Mhm.
I needed all the things that running does for me and did for me back then. I needed those things and the community, along with the structure of a step program. And
Mhm.
I've also, again, over 30 years, I've gone through phases where I've gone months or even a couple of years without actually attending. And
Mhm.
I don't think that's probably true. I don't think I've ever gone that long, but I mean, I've gone through periods of time where
Mhm.
where going to actual meetings wasn't a priority, but I did have other,
Mhm.
I fielded emails and phone calls, and I
Mhm.
did one-on-one sessions with people that I was trying to help, and I always had a sponsor. And I mean, so I still kept that constant contact with people, in recovery. And I think again, that's the hardest thing for people to do is, and this is, I think, an important piece of this, the people in your life, and for those people in new recovery, I and long-term recovery, I just think this is true. We can be shocked sometimes by the people who we think should be our biggest supporters and the people who love us the most, yet they end up pulling us back into the abyss. And some of that is because those people are afraid that we're going to leave them. You know, it's a strange thing. I mean, people in my old party,
Mm,
my drinking group, you know, they saw how much I struggled and the mistakes I made, yet they,
mm,
you know, would
mm,
say, "Hey, you know, you don't need to quit. You just need to slow
mm,
down." You know, and I'm
mm.
like, "Dude, have you been watching me?" Like,
Have you been watching this train wreck for 20
right.
years?
Don't you think I would have done that by now if I could have? And the same is true, I think, for, you know, you're a guy that has big ideas, you know. You can tell somebody, "Hey, I'm going to run a marathon. I'm going to run 100 miles, or I'm going to run across the United States." And there will be people who, generally speaking, love and support you who will say, "Oh, you know, that's not a great idea," or whatever. And I mean, I'm like, do not listen to those people. And very often, their biggest fear is that you will go on to do this. The best example, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting myself. The best example I have is I've helped a lot of people lose weight. Like, that's a thing. And
All right.
very often couples will, or even best friends will decide, they're both maybe had some struggles with weight. And so they want to go into this challenge together, right? So they want me to help coach them to lose weight. One of the first things I say is, look, you are two individual people. You have a chance and a choice to support each other in this goal. But at some point, one of you is going to be more successful than the other one. And, you know, the minute the guy loses 25 pounds and the woman, you know, has only lost 3 pounds, and she starts looking at him like, oh, he's going to leave me because, you know, he's losing all this weight and he looks so much better, and screw this, I'm not going to do it. Like, it's a hard dynamic. And the same thing happens in recovery, is people will, you know, want to pull you back into their life because they know that if you actually get better, you might very well leave them.
You're also touching on something that when you change, you as a person, you're shifting the people dynamics within your life. Like, so your wife or partner, she may be used to you, needing her to be your mother, and all of a sudden you're responsible, and she's like, "Oh my God," right? Like, what am I? Who am I? Right? Like, and so a lot of it is subconscious, and you see this a lot in recovery where the dynamic shift. People may divorce, they may separate, or they may hold on and get through it. But it is tricky, and a lot of it is unconscious. I'm curious, Charlie, do you ever get this question? Because I get this question a lot. If I they People say, RJ, if you could drink successfully, would you drink? Or yeah, right. So, how do you answer that question? Because people like, okay, you're 30 years sober, like, and they don't get the whole piece around addiction and whatever. They're like, could you have a drink tomorrow? What's your answer to that?
I love the question, and I do get it all the time, and it's funny. And I depending on who I'm talking to, I pick how provocative to be. But I wanted to say one thing
Yeah.
about the other comment you made. Like, my first marriage didn't survive my sobriety. So it's
Mm,
weird. Most people think that, you know,
mm,
relationships crumble because of addiction. Mine crumbled because of sobriety, because you know, like you said, I no longer needed a caretaker. I didn't need
mm,
somebody to call my boss and tell him that I was sick, or to make excuses about why we couldn't show up for the thing. And, you know, and I
mm.
had years and years of that. And she, my first wife, grew up with an alcoholic father, so she was very comfortable with the craziness. And
Your just with that, your story in your book, and I don't want to take her inventory, but like, she gave you a lot of rope.
oh yeah,
Like a mad codependent, it seemed like, just a lot
totally.
of rope. Like, you
And
just
she
did
knows
what
it.
you wanted. You did what you wanted, when you wanted, how
Yeah,
you wanted.
yeah. Yeah,
You'd be
I mean, we
away
went we
from
we we
it was
went to we
crazy.
went to therapy. We went to therapy, and I love her. She's
Yeah,
the mother of my kids. We get
yeah,
along
yeah.
great. We actually never argued. I mean, even
Wow.
during, she wasn't happy about getting divorced, but 5 or 6 years into my sobriety, I was able to like say, you know what? I don't love this person. I love her for being the
Mm,
mother of my
mm,
kids and the human
mm,
being
mm,
that she is, but I could no
mm,
longer picture myself
mm,
being at 35 years old or whatever I was then. I could no longer picture myself being married to this person for the
mm,
rest of my life.
mm,
And
mm,
I just knew that I wouldn't be happy. Like I couldn't make that happen. And so, and
mm,
so I ended it, and it was the right decision for both of us. And she's now like happily married to her college sweetheart. I mean, everything worked out just fine, and we co-parented well together. But I mean, to your other question of I'll get it all the time. Couldn't you just have one beer? And I actually always say to somebody who asks me that question, I'm like, yeah, I could. Like right now, chances are like I think 100%, 99% that if you handed me a beer and I decided to drink it, I could just have that beer. And I could probably do that tomorrow. I could maybe do it for a week or a month or a year. I might even do it for a pretty long time, like one beer a day. That might last for a little while, but absolutely 100%, no doubt about it. Their day would come where I would have two beers. 100%. And then the day would come where I would have four beers, and then I'd have all the beers, and then I'd be dialing my Coke dealer from 30 years ago, hoping
He'd be geriatric now.
well,
Right.
dude's probably long since dead, right? And
Right.
and that is, I mean, that's actually the easy part for me is to inevitably, to take that all the way to the final
Yeah.
thing, and really also to, I mean, I freely admit too, my who I am is actually tied up in, sobriety and being a sober person, and like to lose that person would be really weird. I mean, and it's, you know, the obsessive part of me. I mean, here's the other thing. I feed my addict every single day. I just don't feed it with drugs and alcohol. And so the addictive nature that those of us who are lucky enough to be addicts, the addictive nature that we have is the whole reason that we're actually good at other things. Like without that obsessive quality where I can't focus on anything else except that thing until I get it done, without that quality, which is deeply related to my addict, I probably wouldn't be good at anything. And so I'm grateful every day for the addiction. And I don't mean it on like a 12 step, like you hear people say, I'm a grateful recovering addict. I'm grateful for the addiction, not necessarily not all the pain that it caused, but some of it. But it is the recognition that like that part of me is what makes me good as a runner. It makes me good at business sometimes. It makes me and it also can steer me wrong, because I get fixated on things in a way that not everyone relates to. And occasionally I'll force something to, I mean, the nice thing is I'm getting older, and I've mellowed on that. Like I'll pick a project. Hell, you've heard me talk about it. I've been trying to make my Dead Sea to Mount Everest project happen for 10 years now. And I get close every year or two, and I got really close this year, and I actually think, that next year I'm going to get there. But the difference is it doesn't destroy me if it doesn't happen. The addict part of me back in my 30s, if I didn't get my way, it really, really dug deeply into my psyche. And like if a thing didn't happen, no matter what I said, what spiritual place I found, and like I could pretend like, oh well, it just wasn't the right time in the universe and blah blah blah. But deep down I was like going, damn, it's killing me. This isn't happening. Nothing kills me. Nothing affects me that way anymore. I do my best. When I get fired up about something, I do my best to make it happen. I accept the challenges. I'll try to overcome those hurdles. And even when just like with Dead Sea to Everest, if I have to set it aside for the time being, it's still there. That opportunity is there for me, and it may never happen. I may go the
Mm.
rest of my life and it may not happen, or maybe I'll help somebody else do it someday. But just the promise of it is actually what helps to drive me and keep me fired up and focused. And I don't feel like a failure if I don't get it done.
With your Sahara run, like you know, it was well articulated in your book. Like, I think part of why you got through it was because you're an addict. Like, you were absolutely dogged with all the challenges of getting that shit done, the
Hmm.
organizing, the funding. Like, I don't know if you weren't Charlie Engle, if you would have been able to get that done, but you had a lot of self tied up in that project, right? Like, it was like life or death, right? It came across as it was super critical, right? And that's not uncommon to the addict and alcoholic. And I suppose what you're saying, and that, alludes to the earlier part, how we commenced this conversation, that even if Charlie Engle couldn't run one day, you'll find a way to evolve, because that's
Oh
kind
yeah.
of the path that you're on. It's touching on the whole controlled drinking part. I had a guest on my show who is the head of Smart Recovery in
Mhm.
Australia.
Yeah.
And I just found the whole concept, if I'm to be honest, like, I appreciate and I respect this all for, like, but because it challenged the way I view uh addiction. And I've heard Rich Roll, and I've seen him on an interview kind of have this struggle as well. Like, we're abstinence people. And it just, I couldn't wrap my head around, like, so she said to me, my guess, she was like, most people in addiction probably don't realize it, that they could successfully have one or two. And I disagree. In Alcoholics Anonymous, we wouldn't consider that the real. The clause is always the real alcoholic, right? The
Hmm.
real alcoholic. No one really knows what that is because it's subjective. But the question I have is, when you know that something's destroyed and absolutely obliterated you, and you still feel the need to do it,
Hmm.
what's that say about your relationship with it? And I think that's the kicker there, right? Like, when someone asks me, "Oh, can you have a drink?" and I said, if I were to have a drink, knowing what it's done and what's at risk, my two children, my wife, like, for me to still take that drink, for me, says there's an issue. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
inherently, like,
I
like, it's just, it's a yeah. So, like, I think anyone that tries to dance with the bear
yeah.
after the bear's
Yeah.
been put in the cage, it's like, well, why, right?
Yeah. No, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, there are nuances. You know, I work with the top VA hospital,
Yeah,
Veterans Administration hospital in the country, down in Lake Nona, Florida, in the Orlando area. And
yeah.
there's 120 patients in the substance use disorder wing, and 80% of them are homeless. And if
Yeah.
my only metric was abstinence, I would
Mm.
have a
Mm.
100% failure rate for the most
Mm.
part. And so, I have to, there's me and my sobriety, and then there's everyone else, and maybe I'm trying to help them. So even with Rich, I mean, he's a 12-step guy, and Russell Brand, and I've
Mm.
listened to their conversations, and like, I it's look, I mean, it's kind of white people problems, as I like to say. It's very easy to say, that race
Yeah.
doesn't matter if you're white. And again, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be going down that
No,
road,
no,
but
no,
like,
but I get it.
it's very easy to say that something doesn't matter if you're already in the safe
Mm.
majority place. Like,
Mm.
you've already got it whipped, therefore this is the way to do it. And I know those guys, and they're open-minded enough to, like, we'd have this same
Mm.
conversation. But I've
Mhm.
I've also had the good fortune to be able to work with homeless shelters and work in places where, if abstinence was my goal and I, like, kicked people out of my meetings, or I said, hey,
Mm.
look,
Mhm.
don't come back until you make the commitment to sobriety, meaning abstinence would be the implication, I lose a lot of people. And So I think it's always important to remember that we say 12-step recovery is like AA is the most successful. And I think it probably is. I mean, the
Mm,
anonymous nature of it makes it pretty hard. Nobody can
mm,
actually say what those numbers look like. But like if 10 people come in the program, you and me actually don't know
mm,
whether 8 of them just keep drinking and dying. And then the two that are successful, you and me, we're out here talking about it. So it feels like the whole AA world must be successful. And so I think that it's to
mm,
your to the biggest point that you're making. I cannot for the life of me imagine what value I would find in having a drink or that would torture me every single day from that point on. I would then be asking myself, should I have
mm,
another one today?
mm,
Or the next time somebody it's so much simpler and
mm,
easier in my life to just not have that ever be
an
a
option.
choice. Plus, I
Mhm.
love, hey man, I'm the king of sparkling water. I mean, I
Mm,
love,
me too.
I'm like a sparkling water snob. Like
I think
I'll,
it's like there's a similarity with beer. I felt when I
yeah,
got sober, I was on the sparkling waters, and it seems to be a common. Maybe it's the fizziness.
yeah, something about it I
I
love, and I
just
love
I
the
don't.
flavors and like, and look, there are some. I've got a friend who runs a very, very high end 12-step recovery program, and they actually look. They don't do everything the way others do, and they have mocktail parties,
Mm,
and they'll make these sort of crazy fancy drink. They're not meant to like taste like alcohol, of course, or
mm,
anything like that. They're just fancy juices with cayenne
mm,
pepper and
mm.
this and that. And I mean, it's fun. It's nice to have a bunch of people standing around, sort of drinking, a
Yeah.
fancy looking drink and feeling normal. And I mean, it is the never ending question: is where's that line drawn? And I think the most important thing is it's an individual. It is going to always be an individual choice, and nobody else can relate to anybody else's pain or misery exactly. Now,
Mm,
I got to go in a minute, but I will tell you
mm,
this. I think we talked about it before, but like I'm wearing wearables all over the place, and I've started doing a lot of coaching using wearable devices with people. And so there's a couple of big announcements coming, actually, even in the addiction recovery space, where we're using wearables
mm,
for people getting out of rehab. Because I
mm,
do also think that while traditional
mm,
recovery
mm, mm,
is still the strongest path to long term sobriety, there are technological ways that we can, like if I'm coaching someone, coaching I use loosely, it's life coaching. I'm not
mm,
telling them how many
mm,
miles to run
yeah,
necessarily.
right.
It's just that if I can see your
Answer.
sleep patterns and your
Mhm,
exercise patterns and your HRV and your resting
mm,
heart rate and your skin temperature, like if you're somebody in new recovery, if you're a new person in recovery, you've just
mm,
gotten out of rehab, and I'm seeing those things, I can predict a relapse. I mean, honestly, I can. And it's not. I'm no genius. It's you see somebody who's not sleeping,
yeah.
they're not exercising. There's certain
Mm,
things that are happening, and they're finding no balance and no recovery in their life, no
mm,
strain
mm,
recovery, exercise recovery, mental recovery. They're headed for hard
mm,
times. And
yeah.
if I can see that, it doesn't mean I can prevent it 100%, but at least I can reach out to that person and say, hey, I see you're not sleeping. Here's a Deepak Chopra meditation. Why don't you try this tonight, 30 minutes before you go to bed? They
Yeah.
might not, they might not do it. But they've been seen. And I think the biggest
Mm,
our entire conversation today has actually been really around, in my view, around community and fellowship and like isolation and feeling lonely in addiction recovery, in addiction too, but even in recovery, those are the killers. That's what
mhm,
will take you back
mhm, mhm,
out.
mhm,
That's what will take your life, is isolating and being lonely. And so if there's another tool that we can use to help um, bridge that gap Like if all I do is text you and say, "Hey, I see you didn't
Mm.
sleep well last night, dude. I hope you have a better
Yeah.
night's sleep tonight." It's you've been seen. And like all of a
Yeah.
sudden you don't feel quite so lonely and you're like, shit,
Yeah.
I'm not
It's
sleeping well.
brilliant. It really is. It
So
really is. Next
I
thing you
think,
know, sponsors will be using wearables for their sponsees. I mean,
yeah.
you should, but
Well,
we should
no,
be
actually,
leveraging
I mean that
technology.
honestly, that is what I'm literally advocating for because certainly on the professional level, like a treatment center, because think about it, man. When someone leaves rehab, 100% of the data that's collected after a person leaves rehab is self-reported. So, in other words, even if it's back to the rehab, even if it's a good rehab
Mm.
that
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
really trying hard and whatever, the only thing they have to rely on once that person walks out the door is the patient or the client telling them how they feel. That's pretty much all they've got to go on. And we know that those first
Mm.
6 months after someone leaves rehab, that is the time when they have the greatest likelihood of relapse. Like if you can just get past that early recovery stage.
Yeah.
And so this is another tool. I mean, I call it more of a communication device. I don't even care which one. Like I'm on the advisory board for Whoop and full disclosure, but like that's that's just a relationship that I have. If someone comes to me and they've already got an Aura ring or a Fitbit or a Garmin watch or whatever, and they're willing to share their data with me, I
That's
can
good.
help. I can
Mm.
use that as a tool potentially to help them stay sober, and to maybe I know before we finish, I, I said this last time we talked. The one thing I believe that is missing so greatly in addiction recovery is physical movement. If you're
Mm.
not moving your body in some way, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't be an ass, but if you're outside the AA meeting smoking and then you're heading to the donut shop right after the meeting, man, you, maybe you've delayed the inevitable by not drinking anymore, but you're still just putting. I've spent way too many years putting poison in my body, and I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, no, it's so true. It's so true. And I think you're doing and where you're going with that is bang on. I've had my thoughts around that as well in terms of using that type of technology, and it's good to see and hear that you're doing that. So we'll land the plane now. I just want to thank you, Charlie, so much for your time. I always enjoy having you on the show. So charismatic, fun. I learn a lot. Obviously, look up to you in many ways because of the similarities and the road that you've traveled and that I'm traveling. So where can our audience find you, learn more about what you're doing? We know you're always doing different stuff. Just give us a plug, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks. And I mean, all that you just said, I say it right back to you. The reason I say yes anytime you ask is because I like having these conversations, and hopefully they help somebody else out there. But as long as they help you and me, I'm good with that. So my website is still always the clearinghouse. So it's just charlieengle.com. Social media, Instagram's the place that if you want to see what I'm doing and see videos of my cat, that's a good place to go. And I've started using LinkedIn more than I
Good.
have in the past. So it's kind of become a little more. I've become more active on there, partly because I like to talk about the business
Yeah.
of recovery, because it's all. I mean, the other thing I say, I say it to you and anybody else out there. It's taken me a lot of years to get there, but it's okay to make a living helping other people. Like you don't, I spent a lot of years thinking that if I wasn't just volunteering my time all the time, that what I'm doing now is I am finding ways that I think I
Yeah.
can help people, but it's actually okay if through the
Mhm.
coaching process and
Yeah.
whatever, if I get an opportunity to pay my own bills that way, as long as I'm sure what my motives are, it's okay. I mean, that's not that much different than somebody that does addiction therapy.
That's right.
It's okay. So that's why I have these conversations with you, and I look forward to hopefully getting some miles in together sometime soon.
Yeah, we missed you coming down with Pat and Dean, but I got to catch up with them. But hopefully, either here or there, man. But anyways, all
Perfect.
the best.
Yeah.
Thanks. See
Yeah.
you,
All
man.
right, brother. I'll see you soon.